San Francisco, California. I want you to imagine that you are there, and in 1848, the roads were not paved. They were muddy because if you've ever been to San Francisco, it rains a lot and it's windy a lot. And as you walk down the muddy streets of San Francisco, you come across a man standing on an apple crate with a big hat and a booming voice. And he's saying, hey, there is gold in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Come on up and get your fill of gold. Of course, as you listen to him, you think to yourself, yeah, whatever. I've heard that before. I've heard about the snake oil. I've heard about the El Dorado and the lost city of gold. And then, as people are trickling away, he takes something out of a bag, a jar filled with gold flakes all the way to the top. And you look at it and you think, oh man, there must be thousands of dollars in that jar of gold. Maybe there is something true to what he is saying. In 1848, the population of San Francisco was less than 1,000. There were less than 2,000 people in the state of California, though it wasn't a state back then, of course. Most of the people were not Americans, but Mexicans and Native Americans. But by 1850, the population of the state had reached well over 30,000 because of this advertisement of gold in California. In Northern California, it is estimated that there were more gold coming out of Northern California than the rest of the world combined. That's how much gold was coming out of Northern California. There were people traveling all over the world trying to get to the gold rush up there in the Sierra Nevada mountains. People from China and Latin America and Eastern United States, Europeans came over. In fact, the guy who discovered the gold wasn't native to California. He wasn't native to the United States. He was a European. Mr. Sutton was his name, and he discovered the gold. But eventually, more and more people started discovering the gold as well. And it was quite a journey to get to California. You can imagine most people that were living in the eastern part of the United States, and to make the journey over was quite the task. How many of you remember the story of the Donner Party? That had happened a couple of years before this event. And so people were very fearful of traveling over across the United States and into the Sierra Mountains because of what had happened with the Donner Party. But they started making this journey. There was this one individual, his first name is Jake. They're not really sure of his last name. But Jake had traveled across from Georgia to Northern California, hoping to strike with gold. And he found his claim, and he started searching and mining for gold. And he found some. He found a good chunk, a big bag full of gold. And Jake had a pregnant wife at home in Georgia. They had some children as well. And so the first thing he did once he found his gold is he ran straight to the bar. And he went to the bar and he said, hey, give me a glass. And so they gave him a glass, and he filled the glass to a line, and he filled it completely with gold flakes. And so, within that jar or that glass, there was lots and lots of money with those gold flakes. And he said, okay, I want you to pour another glass, and I want you to fill it to the same line with whiskey. And I'm going to pay you in gold for that jar, for that whiskey. And which it was so much higher than what that whiskey would usually cost, especially in that time and day. And he said, but I have all this money. I'm going to pay extravagantly for this gold, for this whiskey. That's what he did. And then he went to brothels, and he went to other places in San Francisco. And many wonder if he ever made it back to Georgia where his pregnant wife and kids were at. One of the things that had happened with this first lottery of the gold rush was that as people were traveling over, the amount of Americans were very few in number compared to the Native Americans and the Mexicans and other peoples of color. That the Americans, they thought that this land belonged to them, even though California was not a state at the time. And so they started to treat the Chinese and the Mexicans and the Native Americans very poorly. In fact, they would get to a claim and they would say, hey, if you're not an American, you don't deserve any of this gold. And so they would start to threaten them, and in many, many different ways, the minority attacking the majority. I once pastored a church in this state that was hoping to grow and hoping to attract lots of people. So they prayed, and they prayed to God, God, we want people to come to our church. We want people to come to our church. And they spent a lot of time focusing on attracting people to their church. It was a good thing. But one day, something happened. God answered their prayers, and they were upset. God answered their prayers, and they were upset. People started coming into the church. They come in walking through the doors, and they were conflicted, and they panicked. And the next day, on Sunday, they had a meeting together, emergency meeting. And they said, what are we going to do with all these people coming to our church? They didn't know what to do with them. They didn't know how to handle these people who were so much different than them, led different lives, had different values. What do we do when sinners come to our church? They're so much different than us. So they didn't know what to do. They were afraid of how other churches in their community, how the businesses and their neighbors would feel about a church where sinners attended. What would happen if we were known as the sinners' church? And so they said, hey, these people can't come to our church. It was a hard meeting to be a part of, to hear sinners can't come to our church. In Luke 15, we find something similar. Jesus is surrounded by sinners and tax collectors. And Luke 15, in verses 1 and 2, the scene begins to open up to us. So if you have your Bibles, I invite you to turn there. Luke 15, verses 1 and 2. Luke 15, verses 1 and 2. And as you're turning there, I'm going to offer a word of prayer. Father in heaven, we are so thankful that even though we are very different from you, that you love us and you take us in, that you receive us. And so, Father, as we look at your son Jesus and his parables in the midst of conflict, in the midst of spiritual people tearing down sinful people, we ask that we may have a better picture of who you are and what we are called to do. In Jesus' name, amen. Luke 15, verses 1 and 2, it says, now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to him, drawing near to Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled, saying, this man receives sinners and eats with them. I heard an interesting story. There was this missionary who would travel to the Middle East, and that's where he was a missionary, was in the Middle East. And if you know a little bit about Middle East custom, a big part of what they do is if you eat with someone, it's synonymous as being a part of their family. It means that you have accepted them into your home. And so this missionary, he was getting in trouble with the local government and the Muslims of the area, and they told him, hey, you got to stop what you're doing, or else we're going to take serious action on your life and on the life of your family. And he said, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to keep having Bible studies. I'm going to keep preaching. I'm going to keep studying the Bible. And so they said, fine, we're going to have to take you in. And so they arrested him, and they were about to execute him. And one of their customs is that prisoners get a one last request, though it can't be, hey, I don't want to die. That can't be your request. And so they said, hey, what is your request? What do you want? And they said, I would love to have a meal with you and your family. That's all I want. I just want to share a meal with you. And so they had to honor it. So they brought him into their home, and they had a meal together. And before long, they realized, oh, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. And so they couldn't execute him because they had shared a meal together. So the scribes and the Pharisees are upset that Jesus is eating and receiving sinners and tax collectors. You know, tax collectors, the ones who betrayed us, betrayed us as Jews, and are taking money from us and giving it to the enemy. You know, I don't believe that the Catholic Church is the enemy of the Adventist Church. I don't believe that. But you know, some might have that idea, and I think Catholic people are lovely. They're lovely people. But this would be synonymous for those who believe in that way and in that sort of way, that Jesus is eating with Catholics. Could you imagine? Jesus is eating with Muslims. Could you imagine that? And he's accepting them into his fellowship. And the Pharisees are very, very upset that Jesus would associate himself with people down low, sinners and tax collectors. See, what I love about Jesus, one of the things I love about Jesus is that Jesus chose to be distinct and not distant. Jesus chose to be distinct and not distant. Friends, we're called to interact with sinners. That's you and me. We sin every now and then. We strive to be great, but sometimes we fail. And we are called not to simply be different, but we're also not called to be distant. I should rephrase that. We are called to be different, but not distant. You know, a big part of Christianity, sometimes we say things like we should separate ourselves from the world. When it comes to morals and ethics, I believe that is true. But how can we reach the world if we are far from them? If we are not interacting with them? If we are not connecting with them? And so we are, just like Jesus, we are distinct, but not distant. And so Jesus, he has a great opportunity. He hears the grumbling of the scribes and the Pharisees, and he can choose to do a number of things. He could say, you are very wrong, my friends. But instead, he takes a different approach, and he tells 3 stories. Luke 15 is the lost chapter. Not because it's lost, but because it deals with lost things. We have the parable of the lost sheep, the lost coin, the prodigal son, or the lost son. But we're going to deal primarily with the lost sheep and the lost son. And so I hope that you will take your Bibles, if you already have them out, and join me with them. Let's go and look at the lost sheep. It starts in verse 3. There's something interesting and maybe quite conflicting that happens in the lost sheep. Luke 15, verse 3 says, so he told them a parable. This is how Jesus responds to conflict. He tells stories. So he told them this parable. What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he has lost one of them, does not leave the 99 where? Where does it say? In the wilderness, in the open country, alone. Jesus is not saying, hey, what man, if he's lost one, does he leave 99% of his property in the pen, in the barn, at home? No, where does he leave them? In the wilderness, where David says that there are wolves and bears and lions. We can assume that the man that Jesus is talking about is himself, is the Father, is God. That God leaves the 99. How many of you are comfortable with that? That God leaves 99% of the church in search of the lost. Are you comfortable with that? That God leaves the faithful sheep that have been with the shepherd in search of the one? Are you comfortable with that? It says that he leaves the 99. That doesn't make any sense at all. In search of the one. Verse 5. And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he comes home, I wonder if he went to the sheep first before he went home. When he comes home, he calls together his friends and his neighbors, saying to them, rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost. Just so I tell you, there will be more joy where? In heaven over the righteous? Over the sinner, right? So there's a number of layers here. One, the context of the story is not about the lost sheep. The context of the story is about the righteous people who look down on the sinners. They look down on the sinners. Remember, Jesus is telling this parable in response to the Pharisees, not in response to the tax collectors. In response to the Pharisees. He's saying, hey, there's more joy in heaven over the sinner who comes to God than over the righteous people who've been righteous forever. There's more joy over the sinful people who have come to God over the faithful righteous. Primarily because the faithful righteous in Jesus' context have been mistreating those people who need to come to God. In fact, you look at the story and the context of the Pharisees and the scribes, the Sadducees, and all the religious leaders and religious elites in Jesus' day. They made it very difficult to come to God, to come to the temple. Of course, the Gentiles couldn't go to the temple. You read about the woman who had her blood problem for 12 years. She was not allowed to be in society. There were people, if you had leprosy, it was different. You couldn't be amongst the people. Of course, there's health reasons for all of these things, but it was also very, very difficult to get any kind of help. A lot of these people were outcasts because of their issues. And Jesus pops up in the stories, and he's the one that they can actually come to. Jesus touches them for the first time. Can you imagine you're that woman, you haven't been touched by anyone. No hugs, no handshakes. No, hey, it's so good to see you for 12 years. And finally someone touches you. Finally someone is not just brave enough, but is willing to get close to you. You finally feel loved by someone. There's a couple of things here I want to point out. One, the shepherd leaves the 99 because that one that is lost is just as valuable as the rest. The one that has been lost is just as valuable as the rest. Maybe you've heard this before. It's one of the best places to hide from God is where? In religion. One of the best places to hide from God is in religion. I think of the scribes and the Pharisees. I think of legalists who put emphasis on the law. I think the law of God is good and important, but I think it can also be a place for us to lose ourselves and be so focused on what other people are doing that we miss who God is, and we miss his character. The scribes and the Pharisees throughout the whole Gospels, they are focused on the disciples washing their hands, but they're not focused on the cleansing of their heart. We have people, we have stories of other times where they say, hey, why aren't you keeping the traditions of the elders? Yet they have not taken in those whom God has loved. God views the one as just as important, maybe even more important than the 99. And but what about those 99? Doesn't God care for those who have been faithful? Doesn't God care about them? That question is actually answered in the last parable, in the parable of the lost son. And that parable starts in verse 11. In verse 11, Luke chapter 15, verse 11. And this parable is very unique in its storytelling, because if you know, most stories, in fact, we could even say all stories usually happen the same way. You build a story the same way. It starts with a situation. There's a context, a situation, a story that someone's put in. But along the way, there's a conflict. And what are people going to do? What choices will people make at that conflict? And then there's a resolution to the conflict. In this parable, Jesus continues after the resolution. When all the bows are tied, everything's figured out, Jesus continues. Excuse me. It would make a lot of sense, Jesus, for you to stop at the resolution. Everything's good, everything's dandy, but he continues on. And the question is, why does Jesus continue on in his story? It's because the story is not about the first son, not about the younger son, but it's really about the second, because of the context of the story, right? Because it's about the Pharisees. So let's look at the story. It starts in verse 11 and it goes down to verse 32. Verse 11 says, there was a man who had how many sons? He had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me a share of the property that is coming to me. Initially asking, Father, I'd like for you to die so I can have my inheritance. And he divided his property between them. Notice the father does not say, absolutely not. Get in your place, son. Doesn't say that at all. But he gives him what he asks for. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property. In what kind of living? Reckless living, right? And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in the country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed what kind of animal? Yeah, pigs. And he was longing to be fed. He was longing to be fed of the pods that the pigs ate. And no one gave him anything. He gets to a bottom place after all of his reckless living, after he was hoping, hey, maybe it's greener on the other side, on that other hill. Maybe the grass is greener over there. And he gets into a dark place, and so he's hoping I can have even what the pigs eat. But no one will give him anything. Verse 17, but when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread? But I perish here of hunger. I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. And he arose and came to his father. So the son, he begins to realize, hey, I've done bad things. I've betrayed my family. I've abandoned them. I've gone far away. I've wasted the funds that my family has worked so hard to get. This is a large sum of money. This is not, a couple $100. This is half of the inheritance for the sons. This is a large sum of money. He's wasted it all. He's squandered it all. It's all gone. He has nothing to show for it. No businesses, not a house, not even a carriage, not a horse. He's got nothing. And he begins to reason with himself, well, maybe Dad will take me back as a hired servant. I'm not worthy. He begins to reason within himself. I'm not worthy to be even called a son. But then we come down to verse 18. Or sorry, no, not verse 18, verse 20. And it says, and he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, what did his father do? His father saw him, felt compassion, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. There's a number of things here. Most grown men do not run. When's the last time you saw a grown man run? Unless there's something, someone's in trouble, unless something big, unless there's a fire, or they're for some reason playing a sport, they're not running. They're not running. I don't know. I'm looking at the men in this room. I don't know if I've ever seen any of you guys run. But he runs to his son. He runs to his son. I can remember I went to a birthday party. My friend Luke's birthday party, and we went up in Northern California. Went to his birthday party, and as we're doing different things at the party, I think I was like 13 or so, or I don't remember how old I was. But my little sister, she's 6 years younger than me. She doesn't have a phone, but somehow she called me on the cell phone my parents had given me, and she's crying on the phone. She must have been 7 or so back then, and she's crying on the other end, and she says, Dominic, our mom and dad got into a fight. Mom and dad got into a fight, and dad got arrested. Dad got arrested, and she didn't know what was going on, and I didn't know. I'm far away. I'm in a different town, and I didn't know what to do. So eventually, I go home after the party, and very confused about what has happened. And I get there, and my dad's not there. My mom, my brother, and my sister are there. And I ask questions, what happened? There's different reports. And to this day, I don't know what exactly had happened on that day. But I knew that my dad couldn't come close to our home. And so that's all I knew at the time. And so the first couple of days, I go to school, come back, do your homework, and do all that kind of thing. And as the oldest in the family, I'm trying to be strong for my siblings and all that kind of thing. And but then one day, I think it was a Thursday. Thursday comes and I come home and I just break down. Not even knowing what had happened. But I knew that there was something that I needed. I needed to be with my dad. I just wanted to be with him. I hadn't seen him. I just wanted to be with him. And where we lived, there was a Burger King just down the street. And so my mom said, hey, you can meet with your dad. You'll meet at the Burger King, just go to the Burger King. And so I walked down to the Burger King just down the street and got into the parking lot, and I was waiting for him to come. I slowly saw his green truck come into the parking lot, and he got out, and this is the only time I've ever experienced this. My dad was crying, and he ran towards me. We ran towards each other, and we embraced, and we went inside into the Burger King and ordered food, and I don't know if we talked about anything, but we were just there with each other. And it was such a powerful moment knowing that I don't know what my dad did, but I knew that I loved him, and I knew that he was going to be there for me. What the Father does in this story is so beautiful. Let me tell you what had happened this last week. You might know from Ashley's post this week, but yesterday I'm working on my sermon down here in the church office, and this sermon right here. And as I'm working, Ashley gives me a call, and she calls me and says, "Hey!" And she's shouting in the phone. She says, "Hurry, get to the car. We got to go to the hospital." And so I'm, oh, okay. I have no questions. I drop everything, get to the car. We turn on the car, get Maya in the car, and we start heading to the emergency room. And I don't know what has happened, and so she's crying, and she's telling me what has happened while we're driving, and she says that Maya swallowed a coin. She has swallowed a dime, and she's the only one that we had, and I'm sure more experienced parents would be like, whatever. But for us, it was the biggest thing. Maya was choking for a time, so we didn't know if she was going to breathe, and so she starts telling me, she has swallowed a coin. And I could tell she felt so bad as a parent. She felt that she had caused the choking of her daughter. And she didn't know if that coin was going to stay lodged in her throat or if it was going to pass. And so she's just freaking out. And a part of the first things that came to my mind, and I'll just give you some advice, gentlemen. The first thing that comes to your mind, don't say it. Don't ever say the first thing that comes to your mind. Always say like the third or the fourth or the fifth. It's kind of like when you're making pancakes, the first pancake you make is always bad. It's poorly flipped, but the third or the fourth or the fifth one's really good. So a thought came to my mind, and the thought that came to my mind was, you should tell her that we should put our coins all up on the top shelf or put them in the purse, locked away like that. But does she need to know that? No, she doesn't need. I don't need to tell her that. That's going to do absolutely no good. And so I decided not to tell her that. And so instead, I chose just to be with her and say, hey, everything's going to be okay. We prayed in the car. We went to the emergency room, and as she was talking with the receptionist, I made sure I was with Maya. And sometimes people don't need to know why they did wrong, because they know what they did wrong. And that's going to serve no purpose. The Father does not lecture his Son and say, how dare you come back here? You wasted all the funds I gave you. And you spent it with, and we'll find out later, with prostitutes. The Father does not do that. There's no lecture, there's no shame, but there's only embrace. And I believe this is how God treats us. God doesn't all the time have to tell us, hey, you're wrong. You did this poorly. I would have done it so much better. Of course you were. You're God, right? Of course, he would have done it better. But what the Father does is he runs to his Son, and he embraces him, and he treats him like the Son that he is. The Father treats him like the Son that he is. There's been times I've disappointed my father. There's been times I'm sure I've disappointed my mother as well. I'm sure you can think of those times that you've done things, terrible, terrible things. But here's the difference between a son, a daughter, and an employee and a servant. The employee, the servant, their worth is valued by what they can do, by what they can produce, by how much money they can make, by how many deliveries they can deliver. The son and the daughter, their worth is not dependent on what they've done or what they have lacked to do. Their value, their worth, is in the simple fact that they are a son and daughter. That's their worth. And here's the son, that younger son, who believes that he's worthless now because he has squandered the money. You know, if it was an employee, yeah, you'll be worthless, probably you might be fired. But because you are a son, because you are a daughter, you are embraced. And what the Father does to anyone else, it would have seemed irrational. He gives him the nicest ring. He gives him the nicest robe, the nicest clothes. He has this big party for him. And understandably, the older son is upset. Why is the older son upset? Because he's been faithful. He's been working hard. And now you're celebrating someone who has become a failure? How dare you? How dare you? Verse 25. Story continues. Verse 25. Now his older son was in the field. Notice he's out working while this all happened. Right? He's not just hanging out. He's with his friends. He's working. He's sweating in the field. He's been doing it all day. As he came and drew near to the house, he comes to the house and he hears the sound of music. He hears dancing. He hears the party. He has no idea what's going on. And it says in verse 26, and he called one of the servants, hey, what's this all about? What does this all mean? In verse 27, he said to him, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has received him back safe and sound. And the older son says, what brother? I don't got a brother. What are you talking about? Because he would have. You're not a brother of mine, what you did. While I'm here working, and you're out wasting your money, wasting our money, our family money. I don't have any brother. Verse 28, he was angry and refused to go in. And it has to be the father. The father has to go out and meet both boys. Both in this story, he has to go out and meet both of his boys. His father came out and entreated him, but he answered his father, look, these many years I have served you. Does it feel like maybe sometimes we've been faithful to God and other people are being celebrated? All these years I've been faithful to you. I've served you, he says. And I never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, remember, not my brother, when this son of yours, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. And he said to him, I love this, son, you are always with me. You are always with me. And all that I have is yours. All that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. So why does the father, why does the shepherd leave the 99 in search of the one? Because everything that the father has belongs to the 99. Everything. If you've been faithful, very good on you. They say in Australia, good on you. You've been faithful. Good on you if you've been faithful. If you are lost, you could definitely be lost at church. You know, you can be lost at church. No idea where to go. Have no direction in your life. have lots of questions and very few answers. Maybe within all of the different ways and all the different functions of church, it might be hard and difficult to even find or know who God is. Maybe you're lost. Maybe you've been faithful. But whether you are lost or you've been faithful this whole time, we are not just a group of people here to talk about transformation. Yeah, we love for people to transform out of a life of sin into a life of goodness and holiness and righteousness. But we're also called to celebrate it. We're also called to celebrate it. Because what has happened in the story is not simply someone going on vacation coming back home. It's not what has happened. But there is a resurrection in the story. A brother, a sister has come home. A brother and a sister has come home. And so I don't know whether you are lost or you've been found. But I do know that God pursues you with an undying pursuit. And He is willing to risk everything so that He can come after you. That's what I know. That's what I know. And so it doesn't matter if you used to be a sex worker, if you used to be a liar, a thief, a murderer, a gossiper, a power-hungry fool, or maybe even a church member. I don't know what you used to be, but I know what you can be. And the beauty of God is that He does not look at us at what we've done, but He looks at us at what we could be. There's this great story that Jesus tells of a wedding where, I'm sure you've heard it too, where the father goes out and he says, I want I want the wedding of my son to be filled. I want all the seats to be full, all the tables to be full. And so they send out invitations and no one comes. No one shows up. Can you imagine you're about to walk down the aisle and no one's there? No one's there. Usually people wait on the bride and the groom, but in this story, no one's there. And so he says, this is unacceptable. He says, I don't care who you invite everyone. Invite everyone. I don't care if they're beggars. I don't care if they're store owners. I don't care who they are. I don't care if they go to a different church. Go and invite them to this wedding. So they go and invite them, and the place is filled. But there's a problem, right? What kind of clothes are they wearing? Sorry, what did you say? They're not wearing the wedding garments, right? They're not wearing the wedding garments. In the book of Isaiah talks about how we have dirty rags. Yeah, filthy rags, dung rags in some translations. But what Jesus has done on the cross is He's given us His rags. He's given us the wedding garment. So that when the Father looks upon you, He does not see your name. He does not see who you are, but He sees His Son. And He sees the righteousness of Jesus. He declares you righteous. He declares you righteous. So if you love Jesus, and if you're lost, and even if you've been faithful, but you still need a bit of Jesus this morning, I encourage you to pray with me. Father in heaven, some of us here we've been lost. Maybe we've been lost in the world, maybe we've been lost here. And we want to come home. And so, Father, I ask our people that if you're lost, just raise your hand. No, everyone's eyes are closed. No one can tell if you're lost. Only Jesus can. But maybe you're lost and you need to come to Jesus. Put your hand up so the Spirit can see it. And the Spirit can come to you and usher you and say, hey, God is pursuing you. God is pursuing you. May we be like Daniel who prays and he gives us, in Daniel chapter 9, he gives us this prayer for his people. And in the next chapter, in that very same chapter, the angel of the Lord comes down and says, Daniel, you are greatly loved. The Father sent me directly to you to tell you are greatly loved. Maybe you've been faithful to God, but maybe we've not treated those who live differently, are not up to the same pedigree as us as Seventh-day Adventists, as Christians. They don't keep the Sabbath quite like us. May we have mercy on those who are on a different path than we are, who are in different stages of our connection with you. Father, help us to have the Spirit of Jesus. Help us have the care and the love of Jesus. If that might be us, Father, help soothe our hearts, mold our hearts, speak to our hearts, so that we can love those sinners, love those tax collectors, love those Baptists, love those Lutherans, love those Catholics, love those atheists who you are pursuing. And Father, when transformation happens in our midst, let us celebrate it greater than any New Year's party, greater than any wedding. Help weddings to be inferior to the celebrations that happen here at church because of the transformation that has happened. In Jesus' name, amen.